Chapter 130 to 132. Under the blazing sun, the intense heat caused the earth to crack. As one walked on the hardened soil, a wave of heat rushed up through the soles of their shoes, making them curse the scorching weather and sweat profusely. A peculiar group of 4 individuals were strolling leisurely on the wide country road. At the head of the group was a black-haired youth adorned in silver knight's armor, with a white cloak draped over his shoulders. To his left, a white-haired magus walked with a smile on his face, and with each step he took, 2 beautiful flowers bloomed. To the youth's right was a female knight, her delicate features reminiscent of a lily in full bloom. Her eyes were a piercing shade of blue, alertly scanning the surrounding area for any potential threats. In her hand, she held a gorgeously decorated sword, its surface glinting in the sunlight. Following behind these 3 individuals was a young knight, carrying a large bundle on his back, silently trailing behind them. With each step he took, his footfalls were heavy, creating a sound like a heavy object hitting the ground and raising a cloud of yellow dust. This peculiar group of 4 caught the attention of many people. Indeed, the Magus's ability to make flowers bloom while walking was truly eye-catching. However, despite this, no one came forward to strike up a conversation with them. This group of 4 was none other than Shirou and his companions. "Is this Garrod?" Shirou asked, looking towards the nearby town and turning to Merlin, who was walking beside him. "Yup," Merlin nodded. At this moment, Kay caught up with them from behind and couldn't resist teasing Merlin. "Hey, old white mouse, can you stop with your illusions? People are staring at us." Merlin retorted, "What do you mean by old white mouse? It's Merlin, Big Brother Merlin. Besides, I can't dispel the flower field. It would ruin my image." Kay scoffed. "Who cares about your image?" "Enough with the complain. Besides, the king supports me," Merlin replied. "Is that so?" Kay raised an eyebrow. Shirou chuckled. "There's nothing more attention-grabbing than this." "I see," Kay nodded, pretending to understand. "Huh, I see. What does that mean?" "Why won't you listen to me? But you listen to the king," Merlin complained. "Because you're a white mouse who can only trick people, while Arthur is an honest king," Kay sneered. "What a joke! Arthur is even better at tricking people than me." He was hurt. The king, who was even better at tricking people than him, was right in front of him, yet he was still being called honest. It was just too unfair. Shirou stood at the gates of Garrod, taking in the scenery. The townspeople nearby couldn't help but cast curious glances at their unusual group, but no one came forward to welcome them. Kay approached and asked, "My king, what are we doing here?" "What are we doing?" Shirou rubbed his chin, then smiled. "Why, to stir up some trouble, of course." "'Cause trouble?" Kay was a bit perplexed, not entirely understanding his intentions. Shirou didn't elaborate, and instead turned to Artoria. "From now on, if there's anything that you find offensive, charge in and take care of it." "Huh?" She was taken aback, hesitating for a moment before expressing her concerns. "Are you sure that's a wise decision? It may offend some of the nobles, my king. It could harm your rule." Her thoughts were rigid, but she was not foolish. She swiftly deduced the hidden implications. As Shirou had already mentioned, the purpose of their journey was to increase his renown and for more people to recognize Arthur. The most straightforward way to achieve this was, of course, to stir up trouble in different locations and stand up for the common people. Nevertheless, in the ancient era where the nobles held power, this approach was highly likely to provoke people and prove detrimental to Shirou's bid for the throne. This was because the most prominent nobles consisted of Shirou, who was soon to be crowned king, followed by the northern kings, and then by knights and nobles such as Brastias and Hector. "I trust you to handle anything that comes your way. If there's ever a situation that proves too difficult for you, I'll be there to step in," he reassured with a warm smile. Artoria nodded in understanding and then took off like a sentry, keeping a watchful eye on her surroundings and on the lookout for any signs of injustice. "Are you sure it's wise to grant her such unrestricted freedom? Things could easily take a turn for the worse," Kay cautioned, concern lacing his words. "I'm not afraid of things going wrong. What truly worries me is the prospect of nothing happening at all," Shirou responded, a playful smile dancing on his lips. Kay felt a headache coming on. It appeared that amongst their group, it was Shirou who had the true penchant for troublemaking. By this point, Artoria had already encountered a thug who was harassing innocent people. She began to scold him before ultimately engaging him in a fight. As a result, the attention of the crowd had turned towards Artoria and the battered thug, with many eyes also fixated on Shirou and Kay. Despite Kay's desire to intervene and stop the fight, Shirou held him back. "That's enough, right?" Kay said helplessly. "People are staring at us with strange looks." Shirou asked Kay curiously, "You've been leading troops in the dreams for years, so why are you feeling intimidated by this?" Kay replied with a helpless tone. "Dreams are just that. Dreams. Reality is entirely different. How can you confuse the two? And aren't you embarrassed by all these people staring at us?" Shirou smiled and responded, "No, I don't feel embarrassed. As the chosen king, I have to stand before the people and accept their gaze. In the future, you will have to lead troops to attack Vortigern, so it would be best to adapt as soon as possible." After a brief pause, he glanced over at Kay and couldn't help but ask, "Where's Merlin? I haven't seen him since earlier. Do you know where he went?" "I have no idea." "Who knows where that white mouse scurried off to?" Kay taunted before asking, "Do you need my help to find him?" He shook his head and smiled. "No need. The next battle is mine to fight." Taking a deep breath, Shirou faced the crowd and loudly proclaimed, "People of Gerod, I am Arthur, son of Uther, the incarnation of the Red Dragon of Britain and the destined king." As the number of onlookers continued to grow, Kay felt the pressure weighing heavily upon him. He was overcome with a mix of pressure, shyness, and fear. He wished he could lower his head and bury himself in a hole in the ground. The feeling of being laughed at like a joke was simply unbearable for Kay. However, when he sneakily glanced at Shirou's profile, he helplessly realized that Shirou remained calm with a faint smile on his face. "His heart is just too strong." Kay sighed inwardly and suppressed his urge to flee out of fear. Instead, he followed in Shirou's footsteps. As Artoria spoke out against injustice, Shirou seized the opportunity to deliver a speech and rallied the people of the town of Gerod. Even the patrolling guards were drawn in by his words and joined the gathering crowd. The guards were prepared to take down Artoria and Shirou for causing trouble, but Shirou swiftly retrieved Caliburn and fired a beam of light into the sky. This sudden action caused the guards to hesitate, and they dared not take any further action against them. "Wow! It's the king prophesied by the great Magus Merlin," exclaimed a bystander. Another onlooker chimed in. "He's the embodiment of the Red Dragon, who will lead us to victory against the White Dragon Vortigern." "Will he bring us a peaceful and stable life?" questioned yet another. Excited whispers filled the crowd as they chanted, "Arthur! It's Arthur!" The sudden beam of light caused people to initially be stunned for a moment, but their emotions quickly escalated. Soon the crowd was in a state of chaos. Meanwhile, on a nearby balcony, Merlin smiled and walked towards a group of girls who were pointing and discussing Shirou's speech. "Hey, ladies, are you talking about Arthur?" Merlin asked with a grin. The girls turned to look at him and were captivated by his handsome appearance, coupled with the gentle smile on his face. As he walked, flowers bloomed around him, creating a dreamy and beautiful scene, reminiscent of a prince from a fairy tale. Some of the girls couldn't help but feel their hearts flutter. One of the girls asked shyly, May I ask who you are?" Merlin gently lifted the girl's chin with his hand and smiled. "My name is Kay, a knight of King Arthur. Would you like to have a fruitless love affair with me?" Overwhelmed with excitement, the girl answered without hesitation. I would, Lord Kay." Her heart was aflutter with excitement. Merlin smiled. Standing next to Shirou and listening to his speech, Kay suddenly shuddered all over. It felt as though a cold hand was slowly crawling up from behind him, causing him to feel uneasy and uncomfortable. What is this feeling? This kind of chill. Kay's eyes flickered with confusion, trying to understand the strange sensation he was experiencing. Shirou spent 3 days in Garad, during which he entrusted Artoria with resolving the town's grievances and endeared himself to the locals. However, when it came to confronting the nobles who held land and property, Shirou adopted a more cautious approach. He began by carefully reviewing all the cases in his mind before taking action. He targeted a group of particularly corrupt nobles, and also included a group of relatively more reasonable ones. This allowed for a compromise to be reached where the common people were able to regain some of their land and interests, while also ensuring a fair outcome for the nobles involved. Despite the small gains, the common people were greatly encouraged, and Arthur's name became even more renowned in Garad. Following a pleasant conversation with the Lord of Garad, Shirou bid farewell and left the town. Despite the other party's reluctance to see him go, he hurried on towards Camelot. It took Shirou over 2 months to complete his journey to Camelot. As he passed through each city, he would allow Artoria to stir up some commotion before taking the opportunity to address the crowds from a high platform. This helped to increase his renown and familiarity with the people of Camelot. In the meantime, Kay was left with the daunting task of cleaning up after the mess created by Artoria. Throughout their journey, they battled against monsters, evil witches, bullies who took advantage of the market, and corrupt nobles. Their adventures left behind a trail of stories and legends. Arthur's name became well known throughout the cities of Camelot, and alongside it, the tale of a brave and chivalrous girl who fought for the weak, possessed a straightforward and proactive attitude, and gave her all to everything, just like a lily. This girl was affectionately called the Night Princess by the people. Kay was often seen working tirelessly and complaining about the situation. He felt burdened with the task of cleaning up after Shirou and Artoria's shenanigans, which left him exhausted and frustrated. He had once hoped to bring Shirou serve Artoria, but instead found himself working for Shirou, cleaning up after their adventures and becoming a useful tool to them. Merlin, on the other hand, always seemed to disappear during their adventures, only to reappear later with a smug smile on his face. He would often carry the scent of a woman and even lipstick marks on his face, leaving no doubt that this notorious magus, known for his romantic exploits in human history, had taken the opportunity to indulge in some pleasure-seeking during his absences. For some reason, every time Kay saw Merlin, he felt a growing sense of unease and discomfort throughout his body. Despite this, he managed to focus on his cleanup duties and complete them without any issues. Furthermore, Shirou did not delegate all responsibilities to Artoria. There were certain situations he preferred to handle himself, such as when 2 men were competing to see who could pee the farthest and accidentally splashed a third person. Shirou typically did not intervene in these types of situations, nor did he allow Artoria to do so. However, he had a trick to prevent her from taking action. For instance, in this case, Artoria had attempted to intervene, but Shirou managed to stop her by grabbing her ponytail, causing her to cry out in pain and tears to stream down her face. He released Artoria's hair, and she immediately held onto her ponytail at the back of her head, shooting him an angry glare. "My king, this is the 7th time you've done this. Even if you are the king, you cannot simply grab my hair every time. Surely there must be another way to stop me." Shirou looked at her angry expression and grinned. "You're angry?" "No, I'm not angry," she retorted, still seething. I just want you to stop grabbing my hair all the time." "That's great," Shirou said, nodding. "It's good that you're expressing your emotions and thoughts now." She was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Shirou took her delicate hand and placed it gently against her breastplate. "Always remember to express your innermost feelings with words, otherwise no one will ever know how you truly feel." "Is this also the way of the king?" Shirou paused to consider her question, then nodded slowly. "I suppose it is." She retrieved a notebook from her pocket and proceeded to jot down his response with utmost seriousness. After more than 2 months of traveling, Kay was no longer surprised when a mother lion, previously irritated and humiliated by teasing, suddenly transformed into a docile house cat. However, Kay narrowed his gaze, staring at Merlin with sharp intensity. Merlin rubbed his face oddly and asked, "What's with the intense gaze, Kay? Is something bothering you?" "Tell me the truth," Kay interrogated. "Did you do something to me that you shouldn't have, you sneaky little mouse?" "Why would you say that? Do you think I'm capable of doing something like that to you?" Merlin remained composed and even flashed a faint smile. "Really?" Kay furrowed his brow and questioned. "Absolutely," Merlin affirmed with a nod. "I, Merlin, would never intentionally harm anyone." Kay muttered under his breath. "Then where did this creepy feeling come from?" Shirou turned his head slightly towards Merlin and asked, "Merlin, Caerleon is our last stop before reaching Camelot, correct?" Merlin nodded and said, "Caerleon is the gateway to Camelot. Once we pass through Caerleon and head west, we will arrive at Camelot." Shirou acknowledged Merlin's response with a nod and led the group onwards. The path to Caerleon wound through the mountains. Over the past few days, there had been heavy rainfall, which triggered landslides, blocking the mountain road with debris. Shirou intended to use his noble phantasm to clear the road, but due to its excessive power that could potentially cause further damage to the road, he opted for a different route. Instead, the group took a detour through the forest at the base of the mountain to reach Caerleon. As the sun began to set, the light grew dim, and the group was forced to spend the night in the forest. Luckily, Artoria stumbled upon a cave which provided them with shelter, sparing them from spending the night in the forest with potentially dangerous wildlife. Merlin used his Magecraft to ward off insects, while Kay unpacked his backpack and set up a rudimentary campsite by laying out bedding and starting a small bonfire. Artoria hummed a tune as she cooked meat over the bonfire, while Shirou studied the map of Camelot with a hand on his chin, lost in thought. Their travel for the past 2 months served not only to garner recognition and reputation, but also to gain a fundamental understanding of the state of Camelot. Shirou lacked any prior experience in governing a country, let alone being a king. Nevertheless, having undergone the mandatory 9-year education, he understood the significance of being practical and realistic. Merely having an abundance of ideas was insufficient. He needed to comprehend the current circumstances of the kingdom and make necessary modifications accordingly. Otherwise, it would amount to nothing more than daydreams. As he had anticipated, after 2 months of travel, he discovered that the power of the nobility in Camelot was exceedingly strong and dominant. They held ultimate authority over the interpretation of the law, and the system of slavery was deeply ingrained. Moreover, Shirou was taken aback by the state of agricultural production in Camelot. In the modern era, traditional agriculture had evolved into an intensive type that relied on local conditions and meticulous cultivation techniques to improve land utilization and yield per unit area. This was due to the emergence of small-scale farming practices and a growing population that requires more efficient use of limited arable land under the modern economic system. However, Shirou was disappointed by the state of agricultural production in Britain. He observed how several villages cultivated their crops, simply using a fork to turn over the soil, throwing in the seeds, covering them with soil, and that was it. It was typical subsistence farming that relied on the land and the weather alone. He had made inquiries to the farmers in detail and learned that Britain had implemented a two-field system and had some agricultural tools. While most villages used oxen for plowing, according to Shirou's calculations, the proportion of animal power used in agriculture was less than 5%. It was no surprise that Britain's grain production was subpar. The country's temperate maritime climate was unsuitable for grain production and more suited for cultivating lush grasses, which was already mentioned in high school geography textbooks. Given the unsuitable climate and primitive cultivation techniques, it would be strange for Britain to achieve high yields. Camelot's low productivity in grain production, along with severe conflicts between the noble class and common people, and a decade without a leader or king, all contributed to the overall poor living standards in the kingdom. Additionally, the war instigated by Vortigern only worsened the situation for both the noble and common classes. Many people believed that the absence of a leader was the root cause of the situation, but in truth there were several factors at play. The fundamental contradiction at the heart of the matter was low productivity. The group was simply not getting enough done to achieve their goals. The low productivity of the kingdom intensified various conflicts, resulting in the complex situation that existed at the time. In all honesty, after Shirou investigated the country's basic situation, if Merlin had not confidently promised a way to return home after defeating Vortigern, he would have wanted to flee from the kingdom. The situation was extremely complex, with a multitude of problems arising one after another. If the underlying conflicts were not analyzed and solutions were not carefully considered, it would inevitably lead to an explosive outcome. It was a headache-inducing situation. However, if Shirou wanted to return home, he had to face it positively. After finishing their grilled meat, he and the others went to sleep. Shirou tried to find a comfortable position to sleep, but he couldn't seem to relax. After tossing and turning for what felt like hours, he let out a heavy sigh and sat up. Running his hands through his hair in frustration, he muttered to himself, "Here it comes again, that feeling of being watched." As they continued their journey, 2 months had already passed. Throughout this time, Shirou couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched, particularly during the quiet of night. At first, he suspected that a noble or king might have sent an assassin after him, so he remained vigilant for a long time. However, the watcher's gaze continued to linger without any action, leaving Shirou feeling troubled. The lingering gaze with no discernible source made it impossible for him to get a good night's sleep, leaving him troubled and restless for weeks on end. He let out a deep sigh before rising from his makeshift bed. Kay looked up at Shirou and asked, "Arthur, where are you going?" "I'm just heading to the restroom. I'll be back soon, Kay. Get some rest." Kay nodded and settled back down to sleep. Shirou stepped out of the cave and made his way to a nearby tree where he tended to his needs. As he was pulling up his pants, he heard the melodic sound of a harp coming from a distance. The sound of the harp was hauntingly beautiful, its ethereal melody drifting through the forest like a delicate mist. It carried a melancholic quality that spoke of a deep longing and yearning, a feeling that Shirou couldn't quite put into words. Despite not understanding the meaning behind the harp's tune, he found himself drawn to its alluring sound. Unable to sleep due to the unsettling feeling of being watched back at the cave, Shirou made a decision. Without further hesitation, he decided to follow the source of the harp sound. The Welsh night was humid, and a mist hung over the forest, casting an eerie atmosphere. Within the mist, there were sporadic flickers of light that resembled stardust, adding to the otherworldly ambiance. As Shirou turned to look, he was taken aback by what he saw. A fairy, which he had not encountered in over 2 months of traveling, emerged from the forest at that very moment. They were drawn by the enchanting sound of a harp and moved gracefully toward it. He traced the source of the harp's melody, which grew increasingly distinct, cascading like a gentle stream. Its notes ebbed and flowed, reminiscent of a bubbling spring, sometimes calming, sometimes rushing with the force of a waterfall. The sound would crystallize like drops of jade onto a surface, then soften to a hushed whisper. The mournful tune hung in the air, as though conveying a message, evoking emotions that spilled out from within. The fairies were completely intoxicated, with some of the fairy girls even hiding in the grass, their faces flushed as they tried to tidy up their disheveled appearance. As Shirou emerged from the forest, he found himself at the very source of the enchanting harp sound. A strikingly handsome young knight with long, flowing red hair was perched on a tree branch, his back against the trunk, softly plucking away at the harp in his hands. The mellifluous sound of the harp drifted lazily through the air, filling Shirou's ears with a sense of calm and wonder. A cluster of fairies had gathered around the tree, their eyes fixated on the young knight with his fiery red locks. Each of the fairies wore an intoxicated expression as they watched the handsome young man with rapt attention. Although Shirou looked out of place among the fairies, he sat calmly on the ground, closed his eyes, and listened to the knight's harp playing. The knight stroked the body of the harp gently, and his slender fingers moved smoothly over the strings. As the strings vibrated, the harp produced a haunting melody tinged with sadness. The sound seemed to emanate from deep valleys and mountains, weaving through the ups and downs of life, the turbulence of time, and the sorrow and melancholy in one's heart. It flowed quietly, like a chapter of music. As the song ended, the fairies were all entranced, their faces revealing a mesmerized expression. The knight, lost in his own melancholic mood, was also deeply moved. Suddenly, Shirou clapped his hands, abruptly shattering the somber atmosphere. Clap, 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 clap! The fairies couldn't remain entranced any longer, and one by one, they turned their heads and glared at Shirou with anger. This made him, who was already standing out among the fairies, even more conspicuous. Upon seeing the fairies, who appeared as though they were about to devour him, Shirou nervously scratched the back of his head and apologized. Sorry about that. The thing you did sounded so amazing that I couldn't resist clapping. The red-haired knight didn't seem upset. Instead, he directed his gaze towards Shirou and asked, "Did you understand what I was expressing?" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand." The fairies became even more angry, but the red-haired knight just smiled lightly and wasn't bothered by it. "Are you Knight Tristan?" "I'm Tristan, but I'm not really a knight. I'm just a musician who plays the harp." "I see," Shirou said with a smile. "My name is Arthur, the future king of Britain." Tristan furrowed his brow, and his gaze turned cold for a moment as he looked at Shirou. However, he quickly regained his composure and spoke in a calm tone. "Is that right? So you're the legendary Red Dragon incarnation?" He smiled and nodded, unfazed by Tristan's earlier coldness. "Yes, that's me. Although I couldn't comprehend the emotions in your harp playing, I could sense that there were many sorrowful stories buried deep within your heart that yearned to be told." Shirou stood up, brushed off his clothes, and flashed a smile. "I have to be going now. My companions must be getting worried. Hopefully I'll get the chance to hear the stories you wish to share the next time we meet, if fortune permits it." Under Tristan's gaze, Shirou turned around and left. After a while, a cavalry unit arrived at the scene, and the commanding knight shouted to Tristan, "Tristan, put away the harp. It's time to go. Our intelligence reports indicate that Arthur will be arriving soon. As per the king's orders, we must ambush him at the Caerleon castle." "I understand." Tristan jumped down from the tree and mounted his horse. Unconsciously, he turned his head to where Shirou had left. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing," Tristan replied. "Just a strange audience." Upon his return to the campsite, Shirou found that Artoria and Kay had already woken up and were anxiously searching for him. When they saw him, they both let out a sigh of relief. "My king, where did you disappear to?" Artoria asked with a hint of anger in her voice. Shirou responded with a smile and apologized. "Ah, I'm sorry. I heard some wonderful music and couldn't resist following it for a while. I apologize for making you worry. I'm not blaming you, my king. I am just a knight and have no right to do so. However, could you please inform us where you are headed next time? We were extremely worried," Artoria said with concern. He nodded in agreement. "Sure, I understand, but—" He placed a reassuring hand on Artoria's shoulder and added with a smile, "I must say, Artoria, you are making excellent progress in expressing your emotions. Keep it up." "No, that's not it," she subconsciously retorted, her voice trailing off as she grew increasingly uncertain of how to respond. A troubled expression appeared on her pretty face. He noticed her distress and offered some words of encouragement. "It's important not to ignore your inner feelings. Learning to express your emotions is a valuable skill." Following their overnight stay in the cave, they departed at dawn to continue their journey. Merlin appeared to be in an exceptionally good mood that day, with the corners of his mouth upturned in a cat-like grin and a glint of joy in his eyes. Observing Merlin's demeanor, Shirou couldn't help but feel a bit suspicious. Thanks to his clairvoyance, Merlin was able to observe everything that was happening at that moment. As a half-human, half-incubus, he had a natural inclination towards the latter, which drove his enjoyment of observing humans. Merlin particularly enjoyed observing Shirou, especially when he encountered challenging situations. It had become one of his favorite pastimes. Given Shirou's past experiences, it was clear to him that something troublesome awaited him in the near future, as evidenced by Merlin's cheerful expression. He recalled an incident from 2 months prior when Sir Brastias had visited during a meeting with Sir Ywain. On that occasion, Merlin had undoubtedly observed something unfavorable for Shirou, but had stubbornly refused to reveal it. Shirou lacked clairvoyance, so he was unable to observe everything, but he had learned to keep an eye on Merlin to get a sense of the situation. As a result, he grew increasingly vigilant and instructed Artoria and Kay to be on high alert as well. Artoria, not understanding the reason behind Shirou's instructions, asked him why she needed to be vigilant. He took Artoria aside and pointed towards Merlin, whispering to her, "As a king, it's important to learn how to observe those around you. Look at Merlin's expression. He's wearing a cheerful smile as if he's watching a show. There's no doubt that we'll face some difficulties ahead." Artoria was initially skeptical, but her doubts were dispelled when Merlin suddenly made a bitter face and began to consciously control his facial expressions. Shirou pointed out, "See, he's already starting to control his expressions now, undoubtedly aware that we're discussing him. It seems like he hasn't had much practice in concealing his emotions, and his current expression is quite amusing." Merlin's staff fell to the ground with a loud clank as he gave up struggling against Shirou's observations. He finally realized that he had always been the one observing others, and now he was being observed. He had become a surveillance device, used to judge whether there was trouble ahead. He was at a loss for words, unsure of how to react to this situation. The 4 of them made their way out of the forest and followed the country road, with the silhouette of Caerleon Castle visible in the distance. However, for some reason, as they drew closer to the castle, Kay's complexion grew increasingly worse. "Kay, is everything all right?" Shirou inquired, noticing the sudden change in Kay's complexion. "Are you feeling unwell?" Kay replied with a shiver. "No, it's not physical. I just have a feeling that I'm going to be harmed again." "What do you mean?" Shirou probed further, seeking to understand the nature of Kay's unease. "I'm not sure. I just have this foreboding sense that something bad is going to happen to me," Kay replied with a worried expression on his face. Merlin placed a reassuring hand on Kay's shoulder and smiled in the bright sunlight. "It's probably just your imagination, Kay. Perhaps you didn't rest well," he said in a soothing tone. Kay's expression remained anxious as he asked, Do you really think so, Merlin? He had been plagued by this unsettling feeling, and his demeanor towards Merlin had become somewhat subdued, no longer referring to him as the White Mouse. Absolutely, Kay. Look into my sincere eyes and you'll see that you can trust me, Merlin reassured Kay, his smile brightening. Kay nodded, grateful for the reassurance. Whether it was just an illusion or not, he felt much more mentally at ease. As they approached Caerleon Castle, Shirou couldn't help but furrow his brow. Was this truly the last line of defense for the capital city of Camelot? There seemed to be an overwhelming number of cavalry troops stationed there, all clad in silver armor and mounted on horseback. Passing through the city gate and entering the castle, they noticed that there were more soldiers than civilians on the streets. The atmosphere was serious and oppressive, with a sense of tension hanging in the air. What was even more concerning was that the camps of the cavalry troops they saw were flying different flags. Shirou paused to observe the flags and consider the implications of the military forces stationed at the castle. "What's wrong, my king?" Artoria inquired, noticing Shirou's thoughtful expression. He turned to face the group, pausing momentarily on Merlin's face before speaking with a serious tone. "We must evacuate Caerleon Castle and make our way directly to Camelot." She asked in confusion, "Why?" Kay furrowed his brow and spoke up. "Why can't we stay here and deliver your speech as planned? We've come all this way." Shirou responded with a question. "Have any of you noticed the large number of cavalry troops from different kingdoms here in Caerleon Castle?" Kay raised an eyebrow in response. "Isn't that a normal occurrence?" he asked. "After all, you'll be crowned king in a few days, and it's customary for the northern kings to send troops to celebrate with you." "That may have been true under normal circumstances," Shirou replied, gesturing towards the grinning Merlin. "However, since Merlin had that peculiar expression on his face, I suspect that things are not as simple as they seem." Merlin suddenly frowned, feeling somewhat annoyed. Although Shirou was skilled in many areas, why was he so fixated on observing him? Who was Merlin and who was Arthur exactly? "My king, are you suggesting that they may have come here with ill intent?" Artoria questioned, her expression serious. "Rest assured, I will protect you." "I trust in your ability to protect me, Artoria," Shirou replied. "However, for now, we only have 4 people. Unnecessary fighting could prove costly. Instead, let them expect Arthur to come to Caerleon Castle while we make our way to Camelot." Both Artoria and Kay nodded in agreement, and Merlin's expression grew even more bitter. He made a silent vow to himself that he would work harder to control his facial expressions in the future. The 4 of them turned to leave, but suddenly, a large hand reached out from behind and pressed down on Shirou's shoulder. A cheerful voice spoke out. "Arthur, I've been waiting for you. When did you arrive?" In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Shirou could feel a wave of gazes wash over him as the name Arthur rang out. The cavalry troops who had been scattered throughout their camps all turned their heads simultaneously, their eyes filled with curiosity, hostility, and mockery all directed at him. He could see some of the cavalry members' hands straying towards their swords, which glinted menacingly in the sunlight. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he turned to face the person who had ruined his good mood. He was taken aback to see a tall, blonde knight smiling brightly at him in the sunshine. It was Gawain. Artoria drew the caliburn and stepped forward, her voice cold as she addressed Gawain. "Release my king," she demanded, her gaze sweeping over the hostile cavalry troops with a fierce look in her eyes. Her icy blue eyes betrayed her readiness for combat. It was clear that if combat were to break out, Artoria would not hesitate to strike with the full force of the Red Dragon's true incarnation. "Artoria, how could you speak that way about Lord Gawain?" Shirou turned to Gawain with a bright smile on his face. Merlin couldn't help but shiver as he watched Shirou's bright smile, feeling uneasy at the sight of it. He had seen this smile before and had learned the hard way not to trust it. As he watched Shirou's unnatural yet impeccable sunny smile, Merlin had a sinking feeling in his gut. He knew that when Shirou smiled like that, he was up to something. He was sure that this guy was going to start pulling dirty tricks again. But Artoria was not aware of this. She thought Shirou was blaming her and couldn't help asking, "My king, did I do something wrong?" "No, that's not it. Your reaction was understandable, but—" "Lord Gawain is my nephew," Shirou explained, stepping forward and placing his hand on Gawain's shoulder with a smile. He deliberately raising his voice and beaming at him. "My nephew, Gawain, the Knight of the Sun, and son of King Lot of Orkney," he announced. "I never imagined that King Orkney would send you with 3,000 cavalry to celebrate my coronation." Gawain's face went blank as he thought to himself, "I didn't bring any troops with me, and my father didn't send anyone to congratulate you." Gawain quickly explained, "Arthur, you have misunderstood me. Before Gawain could finish his explanation, Shirou's voice rang out again, interrupting him. "What? Not 3,000 cavalry, but 5,000 cavalry stationed in the forest outside the city? King Lot really shows his respect for me, but 5,000 cavalry is too many. If it weren't for you leading them, I would have thought they were here to ambush and assassinate me." As Shirou spoke, his eyes darted around, observing the movements of the cavalry. The leaders of the cavalry emerged, hesitatingly instructing their soldiers to sheathe their swords while keeping their eyes fixed on Shirou and Gawain, slowly backing away. Shirou breathed a sigh of relief. The physical prowess of people in the late age of gods was far from comparable to that of modern people. Although not as terrifying as the army of heroic spirits he had encountered in the route, the cavalry in this era still had formidable combat power. Gawain was completely baffled at this point. He had come to say hello, but why was he now being represented as bringing 5,000 troops to congratulate Shirou on behalf of King Orkney? Shirou greeted Gawain with a smile and asked, "Gawain, it's been more than 2 months since we last saw each other. You came to find me today at Caerleon Castle. What brings you here?" Gawain's forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he appeared uncomfortable, as if he wanted to lie. He replied, "Well, it's like this. In a few days you'll be crowned as the King of Camelot. As your nephew, I came to offer my congratulations in advance and to escort you to Camelot." "Oh, right." Gawain showed a look of realization, then pushed a slender, cloaked figure behind him forward. "This is Gemos, an apprentice magus who swore allegiance to me." Shirou directed his gaze towards the cloaked figure. The small frame was wrapped in a gray linen cloak, with only some golden hair peeking out, and a thin veil obscuring the face. However, there appeared to be some kind of concealment Magecraft at play, making it difficult for him to discern the figure's features. He carefully scrutinized the figure, paying particular attention to Magus's silhouette, focusing on the contours of the shoulders and buttocks. The wider hips compared to the shoulders suggested a female physique. The figure was petite, almost like Artoria, standing next to Gawain as if she were a kidnapped princess held captive by a wild beast. The woman had blonde hair, a small stature, and identified herself as a magus under a fabricated name. But what caught Shirou's attention the most was Merlin's face, as he tried his best to hold back his laughter. There was no mistaking it. This was none other than Arthur's sister, the infamous witch Morgan Le Fay. She was a key figure in the downfall of Camelot. But why was she hiding her true identity and posing as an apprentice magus? What was her objective? After contemplating for a brief moment, he decided not to reveal her true identity, but instead greeted her with a smile. "Greetings, Gamos. My name is Arthur.